way more range of motion, so those traps are gonna get a lot more stimulus there, and you're gonna be able to move a lot more load. So there's not really a payoff to going with a wider grip there. Welcome back, guys. So today's video is one that has been on the list for far too long, so finally knocking it out today. And that is going to be Pendlay Row derivatives or variations, I guess. We did like a couple of Instagram videos about these, I don't know, maybe like 6 months ago or whatever, and they seem to go down pretty well, so it kind of made sense that we'll make like a longer form video about these different iterations of the Pendlay Row. So again, just for a little bit of context, when we say Pendlay Row for the context of this video, we're talking about basically a bent over row that starts with the bar either on the floor or from blocks. Now, the reason I say or from blocks is because we're going to talk through what we want from our setup with relation to these variations. That doing that from the floor is not going to be approachable or ideal for every lifter, right? Could be mobility restrictions. More commonly though, it's down to like leg length and arm length. Like if you're someone who has a pretty bad build for deadlift, you know, like stubby little T-Rex arms and or a long torso, you're generally going to struggle to get the alignment that we're going to talk about here with the bar on the floor, even if you're using bumper plates or whatever. So for you, having the bar elevated, even just like 1 or 2 inches, like little blocks, can actually make a world of difference to how comfortable that start position feels and then how much tolerance you have for that movement. Because if you're doing it in like a rounded over or a suboptimal position, sure, you might be able to do some weight for some sets, but you know, you're going to get fatigued and cause a lot of strain that you don't want to. So some people will argue that it's not a Pendlay Row if it doesn't start from the floor. That's fine. You know, whatever you want to class as a Pendlay Row, then it would be called a Pendlay Row from blocks or whatever. But the reality is that for some people, this is going to be way more approachable if done from a small block. So just keep that in mind. If you're struggling with the setup that we discuss here and you have that kind of build, or maybe your mobility isn't the best, that can change the game pretty greatly, okay? So now, why would we pick a Pendlay Row over like a traditional bent over barbell row? Now both, you know, have their merits. They're both very good exercises. For me, what I liked about the Pendlay Row is first off, just the position that you're in. You know, it's very posturally demanding, which in this context I see as a good thing, because it's going to help teach you how to dial up that full body tension, which you're going to need for your deadlift, for example. Obviously the positioning is very similar there. So we've got the ability to put more pressure on that part of our lifting repertoire, whatever. The other thing that I like about it is that because the bar starts on the floor every single rep, you get the option to reset your posture. You get to breathe and re-brace between every single rep. Whereas like, say you're doing like a set of 5 or 8 or whatever on a barbell bent over row, you are bent over supporting the entire load for that entire time, which a lot of the time means that your postural strength will actually be the first thing to give, even though I would argue the Pendlay Row, all else being equal, is probably a more demanding position to be in. Because you get that little breather and that little reset, you get a little bit of a break, but you also get the chance to reset to make sure your posture is as good as it can be for all of those reps then. And then the other benefit for me is just basically the, should we say, the plane of movement or the line of pull, whatever you want to call it. Like it's obviously perpendicular to the body. Body is going to be about perpendicular to the floor. You know, we're talking like a very horizontal dominant row, very good for building the upper back and the traps, although we'll talk about how you can kind of bias it one way or the other by changing your setup or your variation. So it's very good for building the traps and the upper back, especially if you've got long arms like me and you tend to struggle with that area. But it's also very good for just carrying over to the other lifts. We've already mentioned the deadlift and the start position, but for a lot of people, the touch point that comes with their Pendlay Row is going to be reasonably similar to their bench press, which, you know, we can probably argue helps it have a bit more direct carryover to your ability to maintain position and, you know, your, should we say, your desired stability and everything else in the bench press, as opposed to maybe a traditional bent over row, like a wide grip seated row, whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot to be taken out of this exercise. The other thing for me is that because it can be loaded heavily, it can be treated like a strength movement. Now, a lot of lifters out there don't have a pulling movement in their program that is programmed like a strength movement, you know, with like a periodization scheme and everything attached to it, when the reality is that you absolutely should. Which pulling movement should be your main movement obviously will depend on the individual, but we know that back strength and pulling strength is pretty key to just about every facet of performance. And yet we'll usually have like a squat, a hinge, maybe 2 pressing movements that are optimized for strength and periodized, you know, accordingly, but then we don't have anything like that for our pulling work. So for me, I really like the Pendlay Row to go in that programming slot there as the main strength-based pulling movement, just because of the load you can use, how well it's generally tolerated, but also because of that direct carryover to the other lifts that we've talked about, okay? So in this next section, we're gonna go through a couple of different variations, all of which have some really cool merit and benefits, and then you can pick which one suits you best. The first variation that we're gonna cover is the Kelso Shrug. Technically not a row, I get it, but the Kelso Shrug is the exact same setup as the strict Pendlay Row, which we'll cover next, but we're going to isolate the retraction part of the movement. I remember we had Jimmy Kolb out for the podcast last year or something, and he'd never done these, and we, you know, loaded these up and I showed them to him and he was like, holy crap, these are amazing. So now it's like, well, if they're good enough for him, they're probably good enough to be included in the video as far as I'm concerned. So why would we do a Kelso Shrug as opposed to maybe like a Pendlay Row? Well, if you really, really want to focus on traps and rhomboids, so basically everything that's more responsible for that retraction part of the movement, this is a way that you can load that up pretty heavy whilst still getting all the kind of postural benefits that I already alluded to in the intro, okay? So the other thing that this allows us to do is, because, you know, let's say we're doing like a traditional like upright standing shrug. Well, first off, most of your traps don't do elevation, that's levate to scap, so you just end up usually getting a sore neck from that, or headaches, even worse. So we need a way, if we really want to work the traps, we need a way of retracting kind of in the horizontal plane, for want of a better way of putting it. Now we could also do like, say, an incline shrug, so like lay on an incline bench and do it there. That can work, but again, obviously that's on an incline and we end up getting limited by, you know, how do you get the dumbbells in position or whatever it might be. And, you know, for the females in the audience, lying face down, chest down on a bench, doing shrugs or whatever else, not logistically a particularly comfortable position. Whereas now when we've got this barbell, we have nothing in the way, we can get more range of motion, we can load it up heavier. The downside, inverted commas I guess, is that it's more difficult to perform, comes with a little bit more postural fatigue, but most people are probably still going to be better off with this variation, okay? So we're going to talk about the setup now. This is going to be the exact same as your setup for the strict Pendlay Row, which we'll cover next. So when we cover that, we're going to kind of like breeze over that segment of it because we're already going to cover it here, okay? So the biggest issue that we see when people are setting up for these variations, at least the strict variations, is that they're too close to the bar. So when we're doing the strict variations, we're not looking to use the leg drive at all. We want the bar not over the midfoot, we want it out further in front. The easiest way to think about it is that if you were to look at your setup from the side, you want the arm to be vertical, because, you know, the scap is going to be the main moving part here. We want to basically align everything with that so that we can go through the biggest range of motion and get the best leverage that we can. The other good thing about that is then you don't have to worry about bashing your kneecaps with the bar. If I start in too close here, when I go to shrug or row, my knees are going to get hit by the bar. Whereas now if I start, for most people, if you say start with it like at the end of your toes, that's going to be put you in like pretty much the right position. You can just adjust it back and forth from there. So I'm going to set up in, you know, whatever your deadlift stance would be, conventional of course. And then from there, I'm just going to soften the knees a little bit to make sure I've got enough hamstring mobility to hinge down to the bar. And I'm going to grab it just outside shoulder width. So knees are soft, knees stay in place then. Hinge down until I can grab the bar. So I'm going to grab it kind of just outside shoulder width grip. We just filmed a video on military press. It's basically the same grip width as that. And now I'm going to lengthen out my spine. So the cues that I'm looking for here is obviously I'm pulling and rooting down into the floor. I'm tucking the tailbone down, lengthening the whole spine, which includes making the neck long and making the shoulders as wide as possible, not shrugged up. So wide collarbones, long neck, chin tucked, rooting down into the floor. And your arm, give or take, vertical to the floor. Okay, now just from doing that, that bar is kind of like wanting to break off the floor from the start there before I've done anything. And that's the point that you want to get to with all of these variations that we're going to talk about, right? Just like pulling the slack, inverted commas, on a deadlift, when you're rooting down into the floor properly and kind of absorbing the load as you should, unless there's something very heavy on the bar, you should be able to get the bar to the point where it kind of feels like it wants to start hovering. That's how you know that you've got enough full body tension to really initiate the lift without anything giving. And that's what we're looking for with most of these variations, right? The Kelso Shrug, the strict Pendlay Row especially. When we're using it to drill postural strength, what we want to see is when you go to initiate that bar moving, your whole entire posture should stay locked in. So like on the Kelso Shrug, the only moving part should be up top here. We want everything else to look locked in down below that. Again, just like we kind of talked about on the military press, okay? So bar is give or take kind of over your toes. For me, it's just behind the end of my toes. Hip width stance or conventional deadlift. Knees are soft, hinge down, grab it just wider than shoulder width. I'm going to use thumbless grip. Root into the floor, lengthen from tailbone to the crown of your head, broaden the collarbones, and then from there, only retract. And then reset. Elbows are locked. Okay, so that's roughly what it should look like, I hope. Now, when I'm talking about the grip width here, when we talk about the rows in a minute, there's some wiggle room to play around with there. But really, for the Kelso Shrug, because we're isolating the retraction part of the movement, there's no real benefit to going like a wider grip, for example, because all that you end up doing is shortening the range of motion. Now, the cool thing about this variation is that you can get your shoulders to go through a really long range of motion. I mean, that bar is, I don't know, moving pretty far off the floor, much more than I can get out of like an incline shrug with dumbbells on the bench, for example, right? So if I end up going wide, let's say I do like a pseudo snatch grip variation of this, right? Yes, it's much harder. I mean, my snatch grip is on the collars, so I'm not actually going to do that, but let's say we go semi snatch grip, same setup. I'll have to drop the hips a little bit more. Now when I go and shrug, I don't get nearly as much range of motion compared to going with that narrower grip that I just did. So we're here, again, root into the floor, lengthen the spine, broaden the collarbones, and then retract. I mean, I can pretty much get it to my kneecaps just from retracting. There, so way more range of motion, so those traps, you're gonna get a lot more stimulus there, and you're gonna be able to move a lot more load. So there's not really a payoff to going with a wider grip there. Now, what we get from this, obviously is gonna be a lot of upper back stimulus, but a lot of postural stimulus in terms of my glutes, my hamstrings, my spinal erectors, my abs, having to work pretty hard there to keep me rooted down into the floor whilst I go through that movement. What I would be thinking about when I'm performing this is, as you go through that retraction, actively think about bringing your chest towards the bar or towards the floor. And the reason we do that is just to counteract what you're kind of naturally going to do to try and gain leverage, right? Let's say this was going to be like an RPE 9 weight or something, right? Maybe as I go through those reps, what we'll end up seeing then is as this gets difficult, people will start bringing the hips forward and leveraging the torso more upright, which is going to take the work off the area that we want, mainly the traps. It's also going to end up putting more compressive strain here, because basically what we're doing is going into lumbar extension against the load, which there are way better exercises to do this with, okay? So as you go through the retraction, focus on like you're trying to pull your sternum, your rib cage towards the bar, go towards it to meet it. You know, in the same way that you might think about like bringing your chest towards the bar on the downward phase of a bench press, that's gonna help stop you leveraging the hips forward and getting the torso more upright. Like I said, that's also really super common on the strict Pendlay Row, which we're gonna go over next. Next up is gonna be the strict Pendlay Row. So I guess this would be like the core lift, and then the others are kind of derivatives of it technically, I guess. So with this one, we're gonna set up the exact same as we do for the Kelso Shrug. That's one of the cool things about the Kelso Shrug, is that you can kind of use it as like an introduction to this kind of movement pattern, how to drill in that start position, but it gives you a little bit less to think about. Most people are also going to move less load on the Kelso Shrug, although there are exceptions to that rule, especially if you're individuals who have pretty big upper backs and maybe underdeveloped lats relatively, okay? So now when we're looking at the strict Pendlay row, obviously the difference now is we're not isolating the retraction, we're doing a proper row, which means now there is variance with like grip width. We can have some play in there, okay? But let's just look at like this, well, I would say maybe the standard variation first, because you've got to plant your flag in the sand somewhere, and then we'll kind of look at what changes when we change the grip or the approach, okay? So again, kind of hip width, conventional deadlift stance, bar kind of over your toes. Like I said, for me, it's just behind the end of my toes. And we're going to set up the same way. So I'm going to start with the knees soft. That's going to give me, there is going to be a little bit of a forward shin angle at the start for the vast majority of people. Very few people are going to be stiff-legged vertical shin at the top, at the bottom position, I'm sorry. So that's another reason why we need that bar slightly further away. It's because otherwise it's going to get in the way of what we're trying to do, right? So we're here, knees are soft, pelvis tucked down. I'm going to do one now with a grip that's kind of just outside shoulder width grip, like I did with the Kelso Shrug. So we're here, just like the Kelso Shrug now. Knees are soft, lengthen the spine from the tailbone to the crown of the head. We lengthen the neck, so make the neck as long, pull your ears away from your shoulders, pull your shoulders down from your ears, whatever, and broaden the collarbone. So then from there, I'm going to root down. Now the bar kind of already feels like it's part of my body, like it's kind of wanting to move around, that's why it's rolling. And then from there, as I row up, the goal is to keep the rest of the body as locked in as humanly possible. Okay, so let my heart rate go back down. With that kind of grip, with that width grip, my touch point, give or take, it's kind of like the lower part of my sternum here. Now, if I wanted to bias it, say, towards the lats, I could use that same grip, but then actively rotate the elbows in considerably harder and try and get that touch point moving down. But remember, there's only so curved this bar path can be because your knees are in the way. If you want to do a really lat dominant one, I'm going to show you a way to do that, and another variation I'll do it too. Now, let's say I wanted to make it more upper back, trap, rhomboid, whatever, dominant, right? Well, let's just go ahead and do the exact same thing now, but put my grip out, say like an inch each side, right? So this was where I was a minute ago. Let's just go like kind of just outside the power ring there. So now I might need to drop the hips very slightly lower because my shoulders are going to be lower in space because the grip is wider. So maybe a tiny bit more knee bend. Straighten out the spine, lengthen the neck, widen the collarbones, and then row. Okay, so now when I do it with that grip, my touch point, I'm amazed I didn't hit the mic there actually, because now my touch point is kind of above my sternum as opposed to below my sternum. So just changing my grip that kind of inch either side has taken it from kind of here to here. Like I said, if you're someone who's doing this and wants a very good carryover to their bench, you can kind of mimic that touch point there, so the recruitment will be similar, or you can just use that to change the bias a little bit, right? The other option you have here, if you want to make it more lat dominant, but still keep it strict, would be to do it with a supinated grip. As we go into supination like that, the elbows are going to be more tucked into the side. The bar path is going to be more curved back. Not everyone can do this because depending on your build, again, if you've got short arms or long torso, your knees are going to be more forward in space and you'll usually end up hitting your knees if you use a supinated grip. If you're built like a human spider, like I am, long limbs, then you can get away with this and it ends up being a really good lat dominant row. So if we wanted to do it supinated for that reason, best way to get your supinated grip, assuming you have the mobility, is just let your arms dangle, go down to the bar, and then just flip them. There's your supinated grip. Super simple, right? Also the way that you can set your supinated grip for your mixed grip deadlift. Now from here, the same thing, root into the floor, lengthen out the spine, lengthen the neck, and shoulders wide, and row. Again, my touch point now is a little bit lower down than when I did that very first variation of the strict Pendlay row with that pronated grip. So a little bit more lat dominant. And for me, someone who's naturally quite a lat dominant puller, again, long arms, that one feels very natural. Like I said, not everyone can get away with that variation. Now, just like we talked about with the Kelso Shrug, the main thing that we're going to see go wrong here, or mistake, whatever you want to say, is wedging forward into the bar to gain leverage. So if I'm here, say I've got a maximal weight on that bar, or I'm the end of a pretty tough set, rather than being kind of set here, as you row, you'll do this. And what you'll end up doing is you'll get momentum and force into the bar, not from the back pulling like so, but from essentially doing an extension through your lumbar spine, right? And like I kind of said before with the Kelso Shrug, there are much better ways of strengthening your lower back than doing that. The other problem with that then as well is that as we go through that, look at where my knees go in space. So I row, I need to cheat leverage, my hips come forward, and I arch up, see how they move forward in space? Then you end up either hitting your knees on the way down, or you end up hitting them on the way up on the next rep, and it kind of all falls apart from there. So if you're struggling with this, in terms of hitting your knees a lot, or you're just struggling in terms of getting like a lot of lower back soreness and compression from it, it's quite possible that you're doing that. So again, the same kind of cue, like the Kelso Shrug would be, as you row, you are pulling your chest to the bar, because you're never going to cheat by going that way. You're never going to act. So what we're always going to do is this, back and away. So now as I row, my thought process is set everything where I want, and now pull my sternum towards the floor as I row. And that does a better job of keeping me locked into the bar. Now, obviously, keeping your torso like completely still, easier said than done, especially when this gets challenging. But that's one of the main benefits of it. And obviously there's a little wiggle room there, you know, like we don't want to, it's not going to be a case of if your torso moves a millimeter, it's like that's too heavy, right? If you want to be really mean, then you can do what we did at one of the train your ass offs. I can't remember when. We had people learning this, and we just put a 25-pound bumper plate on their back. So when they're here, if they cheat up at all, then you can guess what happens, right? So if you really don't like yourself or your client, that's one way of doing it. So that is the strict Pendlay row. Next off, we're going to move on to a variation where you can move more weight. All right, so the last variation that we're going to go over in depth now is the Cheat Pendlay Row. Now, when you're doing your strict Pendlay rows, a good ballpark figure would be to get up to about 50 to 60% of your deadlift. That probably means if you can do that, upper back strength is probably not going to be the thing holding back your deadlift or probably your bench either. So strive for that if you can. Now, if you want to move even more weight, who doesn't, because rowing heavy things is kind of cool, then the Cheat Pendlay row can come in here and help us move even more load, but it also has some other benefits. Now, the setup changes here. Now we're going to set up exactly like we would for our conventional deadlift. So we're no longer going to have the bar further forward in space. We're not aiming to have it directly underneath the shoulder and the scapula with the arm vertical. We're going to do whatever it is that we do to get into our desired conventional deadlift stance, or position, I'm sorry. The reason for that is because a Cheat Pendlay row is basically a mini deadlift followed by a row. So the mini deadlift puts some momentum into the bar, and then we follow through with the row, and obviously the momentum allows us to move more weight. Why would we do this? Well, first off, moving more weight for your upper back muscles is kind of cool and probably useful, but it's also a really good tool for teaching you how to do the first phase of the deadlift. So the first phase of the deadlift is knee dominant, hips and shoulders stay at the same angle relative to the floor as they start. They rise together, the knees move back out of the way, which is what allows the bar to come up in a near straight line on the deadlift, right? This is a very common issue though. People, when they deadlift, they kind of use the hips first off the floor. And what happens if we use the hips first? The knees go forward. And then you're like, why am I always stuck beneath my knee on a heavy deadlift? Because your knee's not out the way yet. So your first phase of your deadlift should not be this, with the shoulders coming up quicker than the hips. It should be the knees go back in space and the hips and shoulders come up together, because that's how we get through a vertical shin, and that's how we create that space for the bar to come straight up. So it does a good job of teaching that, because if you don't do that very well here, you aggressively row a heavy weight straight into your kneecaps, and that generally teaches you the lesson quite fast, or at least it really should anyway. The other benefit then because of that is we get a little bit of quad work in there, which, you know, kind of neither here nor there. But for those of you who maybe like the idea of doing like Olympic lifts, like that kind of whole body pull explosive type movement, but you don't want to put the effort into getting mobile enough or learning the skill of doing an Olympic lift, which I get, trust me, then the Cheat Pendlay Row can kind of be like the meathead version of learning a power clean or whatever, right? Because we get that leg drive, we get that lower body input to create momentum, and then we get to do the row, which obviously pulling upper back dominant, and we get to also then move heavier loads, kind of akin as to what we would on a power clean or maybe like a snatch grip high pull. So setup is different, as I said. Now we're gonna set up like we would for a conventional deadlift. So when I look down, the bar is over my midfoot. That's kind of what we're looking for there, right? And again, I'm just gonna go through the deadlift setup because why not, since we're here. The easiest way to get this right is now that the bar is over my midfoot, I'm gonna bend the knee till the shins touch the bar. Now my knees are in the perfect place, as is the bar, so nothing moves. From here, I hinge, keeping the shins against the bar, and I'm gonna grab it just outside shoulder width for the sake of the row. Your deadlift grip might be here, that's fine. For the sake of the row, I'm gonna go slightly wider. This would be our start position here, it's okay? So what we're looking for before we do the row is essentially phase one of the deadlift, which is this. So again, spine long, neck long, shoulders wide, drive through the toes and the quads, move the knees back. Knees should be back, shins kind of vertical. By the time you get to this point, that is kind of just below your kneecap. So again, we're here, lengthen everything, push through the quads, knee extension, hips and shoulders rise together. There. That is the first phase of the deadlift. You can practice that ad nauseum to get used to that, okay? Now, what we do for the Cheat Pendlay Row is we take that first phase, but then we stop there, so there's no extra movement of like the torso or the legs after that point, but then we initiate the row. And there's gonna be a reasonably straight up bar path, because if the bar is still below the knee, I don't have the ability to pull it back here because the knee is in the way, right? So this is a power-based movement, so you can't really do it slow, but I'm gonna do it slow so you can see what it looks like. So we're here, knees to the bar, lengthen. So stages are phase one of the deadlift, knee extension to here, row. Back again, we would reset between reps. Everything long, drive through the knees and row. Knees back, as soon as you get to kind of the bottom of your kneecap, row up. So even though it's a reasonably straight up bar path, we still get a touch point that's a little bit lower down the torso compared to the strict version we did earlier. So that gets us a little bit more lats. Obviously the leg drive gets us a little bit more weight too. So if you were wanting to do a very upper back trap, etc. dominant version, you might stick to the strict row. You might do it with a slightly more flared elbow position or slightly wider grip. If you wanted maybe a more well-rounded row that you can move more weight on, then you'd probably be looking at the Cheat Pendlay Row, right? So again, if we look at that kind of, should we say at full speed now? So it's been a while, so let's see if I take off my kneecaps. This is gonna be interesting. So bar over the midfoot, shins to the bar, root down, lengthen everything, drive through the knees first, carry the momentum through. And again, set in between. So yeah, if you're doing this right, should be scraping all the way up your knees. Again, if you're a guy and you have any hair left kind of down here, then you're probably not doing your deadlifts or your Pendlay rows right. That, if we're aiming for 50 to 60% on the strict Pendlay row, this would probably be another 10% higher. So maybe up to 70% of your deadlift is what you should be able to do here. And again, this is really, really good for ingraining should we say, postural awareness or postural strength, positioning, whatever it is you want to call it, whilst you do your deadlift, right? Because here, you're explosively moving through that first phase and then performing a row. But the goal, whilst we do all that, is to maintain all of this posture that we want to maintain throughout the whole deadlift. So again, it's really good for ingraining that proper positioning. And again, it's very common for people to miss deadlifts here because they're here. So it can help teach you that also. But this would be for someone who really wants to overload the back more, or get more lat stimulation, or just more postural stimulation from their rowing work. Now, very quickly, before we finish up here, there would be another variation that you could do here. It would be called like a deadlift row, which again, you could do even more weight on, potentially like 75, 80% of your deadlift. The only difference with that and the Cheat Pendlay Row is the point at which you initiate the row. On the Cheat Pendlay Row, the row is initiated before the knee. So you can't pull back to the hip, obviously, because the knee is in the way. And that also limits how much momentum you can impart on the bar, because there's only so far you're traveling with it. Deadlift row would have a bar path kind of akin to a traditional barbell bent over row, because you're going to row it back to your hips. And the reason we can do that is because the row is then initiated once the bar has passed the knee. So you deadlift the bar for longer, which means you can impart more momentum on it, and then you get this more sweeping back bar path, which allows you to make it more lat dominant again. But obviously then the loads are going to go up. It's going to get more, should we say, neurologically demanding. But again, if you want it to be really heavy, or you just want to target your lats with really heavy load, then that would be what you do here. So this would be the only difference, right? Everything else is the same. And now instead of stopping here, you would deadlift to here and then row to your hip crease. So again, so Cheat Pendlay Row, we'd go knees back, knees back, knees back, row. For a deadlift row, knees would keep going back, keep going, hips kind of just start to come through. As soon as you're over that kneecap, row back towards your hip crease. Obviously, as I said, benefit would be more load, which is cool. Downside is going to be shorter bar path. Obviously, when I'm here, the amount of movement I'm getting out of that row is quite a bit smaller, especially compared to like the strict Pendlay row that we did at the start there. So that's kind of like an escalating progression of Pendlay row variations, where basically the load goes up as you go through them. I would also argue that lat kind of dominance goes up, you know, with the Kelso Shrug being at the bottom being basically entirely traps and upper back, and then this one being considerably more lat dominant. They all have their place. They're all very useful. It more depends on how good is your motor control in terms of like, can you coordinate this type of movement? What is the main pulling muscle that you're looking to isolate or work? And how neurologically demanding are you willing the exercise to be? Like, if you've already done heavy deadlifts, doing a deadlift row is probably not a great variation. But say you're in your off season, you can probably use deadlift rows to kind of even maintain your deadlift, because you're doing 2/3 of a deadlift pretty much anyway, and get a lot of heavy pulling work in there, for example. So they all have their place. They're all very useful, and they're probably all worth playing around with at some point. And as always, thank you for supporting Elite FTS. Thank you for supporting our YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.